Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, sorry. My name is Rose. I'm a college and career readiness manager at Stanford Cradle to Careers. A little bit about our program is Bridge to College. I'm part of several initiatives, including this one. So just a heads up, please utilize our counselors because they are there to help you. So they help you individualize like your guidance, essentially like any assistance that you need, college or career. Please answer to them, and just honestly, I would try to use them as best as possible, because they are available for you. And yeah, they're definitely experts. So they're actually working with AITE, West Hills, Stanford High School. So please utilize that. And we also have upcoming workshops as well. But before we get started, I just definitely want to introduce Miss Leshawn. She's going to be presenting our financial literacy part 2. So check her out. Free ways to save up money, and I'm pretty sure she has ample of free resources to provide. Thank you. I think you're on mute.
Oh, yes. Did you want me to start?
Yeah, you can start. You can start.
Okay. So I'll get everything. Okay. Just going to share my screen really quickly. Okay. Let's put this up on the main screen. All right, so can everyone see my screen? Yes, okay. So we'll get started. Today we're going to be looking at personal finance and budgeting, and we're just going to quickly go through a bit of different ways we can not only do so for ourselves, but for future generations. So some of the things I want to talk about is the concept of budgeting, as well as the concept of why we actually need to do it, what's the purpose of it, and especially for those who are just now getting into the workforce, as well as those who are looking to go to college and maybe enter into the workforce on a part-time basis for now. So kind of just looking at that. So today's agenda, we're going to look at what financial literacy is, as well as what is defined as financial literacy, as well as how we make informed financial decisions. Then we're going to look at the basics of budgeting, the concept of budgeting itself, as well as we're going to look at something I truly believe is a more efficient way of budgeting, and it's what we call the 50-30-20 rule for budgeting. Then we're going to look at an example of how we actually create that budget. We're going to also look at the power of saving, and I'm going to explain why we need to save money, as well as why we need to have an emergency fund. And then we're going to go into credit very briefly. We're going to look at how what role credit plays in your financial life, as well as the difference between good and bad credit, as well as the importance of maintaining a good credit score. And then we're just going to look at very quickly, finally, avoiding some financial pitfalls. What are some common financial mistakes you'd like to avoid, as well as the concept of our needs versus our wants. Okay. All right, so the basic definition of financial literacy is basically you having the knowledge to understand, as well as the skills necessary to make what we call informed decisions. And these decisions would, of course, pertain to your personal finances, as well as your concept of how you manage your money. So the reason why we need to have an idea of what financial literacy means, as well as be financial literate, is because we need to make what we call informed decisions. An informed decision is basically understanding what's available to you. What are your options in terms of saving, in terms of getting out of debt, as well as planning for the future. And then using that knowledge that you have to make informed decisions in terms of your needs, as well as the goals you set for yourself, whether they be short or long-term goals. Next, we look at budgeting. Now, what I mean by budgeting, I mean creating an actual plan for yourself and how you plan to spend, or what we call manage our money. And this basically is very simply putting your income to expenses. So how much money is coming in versus how much money is going out. And typically we're going to do that over a specific period of time. That can be typically we're talking about a month. Sometimes depending on how often you have income coming in, that might be every quarter, maybe every 3 to 4 months, or maybe every year. And then what you do is you split those expenses, or how much money is going out of your household, into what we call categories. And we look at those categories because in some cases where you find yourself continually in debt, you may need to pull back and see where it is that the money is leaking. So the process of budgeting is quite simple once you start to get into it. And especially now where you may not have a very complicated situation. You may just have what we call like a typical 9 to 5. Budgeting is quite easy. In this sense, the first thing you want to do is calculate your income. Now, income, what I mean by calculating your income, this is net income. So for those who already work, or for those who are going into the workforce, this is after taxes. This is not before taxes. Pretend like you've never seen that number. It just makes you upset every week or two. So you're going to calculate your income. And income can mean anything. That can be your typical 9 to 5. That can be if you do something on the side. That can be any money that's coming in, and it does not have to be consistent. Of course, if you're doing something like a monthly budget, just estimate how much you would receive and how often you receive it. And then you want to list expenses, and that's how much is going out of your household or out of your pocket every month, typically. And this is the first thing you want to do is list what we call our needed expenses. And these are things that you can't survive without. Like, these are things that you need to survive. Okay, so that's like your rent. For those who plan to own, your mortgage, utilities, your cell phone bill, your groceries, anything like that. And then you want to look at your what we call wanted expenses or cost. And these are things that you choose to have. These are not things that you necessarily need for survival. These are things that you choose to have. So that's dining out, that's fast food, that's going to the movies. That's what I mean by wanted expenses. These are the typical things that you would need to pull back on if you find yourself overspending every month. And then you want to categorize the expenses. So you're just going to group them into categories. And like I said, the easiest way is to have a list of needed expenses and wanted expenses. And then what you're going to do is every time you make a budget, you have to tie it to a goal. There has to be an end goal in mind, or you tend to just go straight off the budget because there's no end goal for you. So you have to set it to a goal, whether that be you would like to save up money for a particular large purchase, or that means you want to save, you want to have a bigger savings at the end of the month or the year, whether it be you want to start saving for retirement, and that's totally okay. Or if you want to go on vacation, or if you need to pay off a debt. It has to be some type of end goal in mind. The next thing is to create the actual budget. That's when you're comparing the money coming in, which is your income, and the money going out, which is your expenses. And then what you're going to do is you're going to have what we call a spending plan. And that's where you plan how much you intend to spend on each and every category. So what you do is you list all of your income, you take the total. And then what you do is you list all of your expenses for the month, and you take the total of that. Once you subtract how much is going out and how much is coming in, that's what we call our cash flow. Okay. At the end, our cash flow, you determine what you would like to do with this cash flow. You determine whether this should go into savings, whether this is actual just free ring cash. Maybe this is after you've already put money into your savings. You determine how you would like to allocate that cash flow. Okay. Then what you're going to do is each and every month, you're going to keep track of your budget, okay? And you want to continue to monitor your budget. The reason being is because a lot of times if we keep on just spending money, we get 6 months down the road and we overspent, or we look at our savings is not as big as we needed it to be. So the reason why you need to keep an eye on your budget is because you need to adjust accordingly. If you see yourself overspending, like dining out too much, or if you see at the end of the month, your cash flow is significantly lower than what you would like it to be, you can adjust accordingly. Perhaps making meals at home, perhaps making your coffee at home, maybe spending less on sneakers. Maybe it's okay to just have one pair of sneakers for 6 months, anything like that, okay? So the next thing I'm going to show you is actually a really simple way to budget. This is a method we call the 50-30-20. I like this because it's really simple and easy to remember. You just have to remember percentages. You don't have to know necessarily any complicated process. So when you look at your total income, what you do is you decide how much of that income will go to each and everything you need. So 50% will go to what we call a need. Okay, so this will be expenses that you actually need to spend money on, which is rent, utilities, groceries, health insurance, transportation costs if you need to get to and from somewhere, or any other essential bills. And you would allocate 50% of your income towards this. And this is the income you receive after taxes. Then 30% will go towards what we call wanted expenses. Like I said, these are things that you don't need, but you want. So these are dining out, your entertainment, vacation, hobbies, anything you kind of enjoy doing, but it's not necessary for survival. Then 20% goes into savings. So after taxes and after you've taken care of all of your needed expenses and your wants, 20% of your income will go directly into a savings account. Now, this savings account can be used for a variety of ways. If you have debt, this is where your savings will come into play. This would be where you would pull from when you need to pay off debt. This would also be where you need to pull from if there is an emergency, because this is what we call your emergency fund. If some unexpected cost was to arise, this is where you're pulling from. And I'll explain why what we call an emergency fund is important, okay? This is also where, when you get into the workforce, you will pull from to actually save for retirement. And this would be self-guided. This wouldn't be something you would get through your employer. This would be a retirement account you may have for yourself for the future. And regardless of your age, you need to start saving for retirement right now. Don't wait until it's too late, and then you have to save a mass amount of money in a very short time. So this is an example of what a budget would look like. So this is what I call a spending plan worksheet. And so you can call it a spending plan worksheet or budget. The words are interchangeable. And the first box you have here on the left is what we call a monthly net income. That's your income. And like I said, it can come from anywhere. It can come from the typical 9-to-5 job, as we call it. It can come from if you receive some type of public assistance, if you receive a disability, if you receive any other income coming into the household, that is considered income. It doesn't matter what it is. And then you're going to look at what you're going to do is you're going to look at, on the second page, your expenses. So your fixed is your needed expenses, and your controllables are your wants. So your fixed expenses, like I said, are needed. And these are like your rent and any insurance you may pay, your telephone, heating, electricity, things like that. If you owe debt on a credit card, I would put this as an expense. That way, if you treat it like a bill, you're more likely to pay it every month. If you have any type of loans you may have taken out, like an automobile loan, or if you have to pay into a life insurance policy, that will go under your fixed expenses, or what we call our needed expenses. And then your controllable is the same way. That's your groceries, your dining out, food. In terms of groceries, that means like things that you you chose to do. So when you went out, when you're dining out or you're doing fast food, or groceries in a sense of things that you may not necessarily need, maybe like snacks and things, and then other household expenses or what have you. And these are things that you can typically increase or decrease each and every month. And then what you would do when you go back to page 1 on the third box where it says compare income expenses, you would add up your income, then add up your fixed and the controllable expenses, and you subtract that from your income. The balance is your cash flow. Now, if at the end of the month you have money left over, that's what we call a positive cash flow, and that's where you ideally would like to be. Then you have something we call a break-even point. That's typically great. It's fine. That means the income coming in and the amount of money going out is the same. However, it doesn't really give you any type of flexibility if something were to happen. And then you have what we call a negative cash flow, where you're overspending. And this typically happens when you get into the credit cards, when you get into taking out loans. It's really easy to overspend because you typically are spending money you don't necessarily have. So ideally, we want to be in a positive cash flow at the end of the month, but breaking even is okay if that's the only thing you can do at the moment. So why do we have a budget? Because the goal of having a budget is to save money. And the reason why we need to save money are not only ideally for unexpected costs or anything like that, but it actually ties back to a lot of other things. The number one goal is to have what we call an emergency fund. And this allows you basically to plan for unexpected events. So something comes up like, now all of a sudden you need to pay a bill that you did not expect. Something broke on your car and now you have to replace 4 tires. This is what we call an emergency fund. And that's the reason why we save money, because these are the things that typically can actually cause debt because you didn't plan for them. The next one is financial security. And this ensures you have the means to cover your basic needs as well as maintain your lifestyle. That does not mean you would have a glorious lifestyle, just the lifestyle needed to survive in a sense, as well as achieving goals. When you save money and you tie them to your goals, it's easier to achieve, especially those long-term goals, if you're saving money actively. So things like, I'd like to save a house. I'd like to buy a house. I'd like to save up to purchase a car. It's easier when you're budgeting and you're making that conscious decision to save. Retirement planning. It does not matter how old you are. At some point, you will need this money. And it's really hard to do so if you wait so late in life. So even at 18, 17, whatever age you are, when you start working, always keep in mind that at some point you have to retire. So start now. And a lot of times, of course, your job may provide that ability for you to contribute what they call an employee-based retirement plan, but this should not be your only source of retirement money. So you have other options like 401ks and Roth IRAs. And when you get to that point, of course, these options will be explained to you. Okay. This also breaks what we call a debt cycle. So a lot of times people get into debt, whether it be credit card debt or loans, and it's really hard to break out of the cycle because they're continually falling into the same traps because they don't know where they're overspending. So a budget allows you to look at what's coming in, what's going out, and allows you to make more conscious and more positive decisions about your money. It also allows you to build wealth. Over time, as you save money, your wealth only increases. It also allows you to cope with inflation, especially now, where over time, naturally, things are just get more expensive. So over time, you need to save money. You need to prepare for those things like inflation, where there may be 1 to 2 years where things are extravagantly more expensive than planned, as well as it creates the ability to have what we call generational wealth. Saving and investing can actually to allowing you to have some type of financial legacy for your family, whether this be the ability to maybe your future children having the ability to help with a future down payment on a house, whether it be getting them having the means to contribute to a college saving plans and they don't have to take out student loans. So something like saving money, something as simple as choosing now to save money, would actually lead to your ability to actually contribute to future generations. So why do we need to have this thing we call an emergency fund? I keep throwing it around, but the reason why we do is because it avoids debt. A lot of times people are forced to rely on things like credit cards or loans in order to get out of debt, or in some cases, in order to pay off something that's a little bit unexpected and not something they intended to. So by having some type of emergency fund, if something was to come out unexpectedly, it doesn't mean you're going to have the means to pay this off fully, but it does allow you to at least contribute a great chunk to it out of your savings versus leaning on credit cards and loans. It also allows you to have a much more quick response to these emergency situations, and you don't have cash readily available for yourself. So it enables you to really quickly respond and address those situations. It also allows you in the future, when you do have these retirement accounts set up, you can borrow against them. And these are things you don't typically want to do because it typically comes with some type of penalty for doing so. So it allows you to keep those retirement accounts intact, and it allows you to continue to actually these retirements to continue to grow in interest and actually appreciate some type of value without you continually withdrawing large sums of money and paying penalties for doing so. So the next thing I want to get into is credit. And this is something that unfortunately many people going into college or into the workforce will have to deal with. So the big thing I want to do is kind of give you an idea of what credit is, the role it plays in our life. It's a necessary evil in some cases. It's if you are privileged to not ever have to lean on credit, that's great. But in most cases, people do in some ways have to, at some point, have a part in terms of credit. The role of credit in your financial life, unfortunately, is that it allows you some type of power to borrow in the future. So it allows you to make very large purchases in the future, because what credit does is it tells lenders or someone or anyone you would borrow money from, it gives them an idea of your ability to pay the money back. So it gives you something we call borrowing power. So in the future, when you are ready to take out home loans, car loans, or any type of student loans, and you just don't have enough cash in hand, you need to take out a personal loan. That's where credit comes into play. And that's directly connected to what we call a credit score. So a score is basically a number that they have assigned to you. And this number is indicative of your ability to pay back some type of money, to pay back money. So basically it says, what is the chances of this person paying back money? And the way they come up with the score is based on a variety of things. It's your payment history, meaning any type of credit cards or loans or things you've had to pay in the past. Credit utilization, meaning how much credit you were given and how much money you actually how much credit you're using. So if you have a credit card with $100 limit on it, how much of that $100 are you using monthly? Are you spending the entire $100 a month? Are you only maybe putting $15 on it every month and paying it back? That's what we call a credit utilization. As well as your length of credit history, how far back since you've had a credit card, the types of credit you have, whether that be a home loan or something like a car loan or anything like that, as well as new credit applications. Every time you apply for a credit card, it does not look so great on you, although it typically is a temporary dip in your credit. it doesn't look very well on you if you have a lot of lines of credit taken out. And then interest rates. It determines how much you pay to borrow money in the future. So if you have a higher credit score, this generally will mean you have a lower interest rate on the money that you do borrow. That means the interest rates on your credit cards, interest rates on your loans. Okay. And what I mean by interest rate is the fee to borrow money. Okay. It's not free to borrow money. Then, as well as your ability to rent or lease. They look at your credit history as well as your score when you go to rent a house or an apartment, or you go to lease a car. This is what they're looking at. And they use these credit scores and histories to determine whether they would like to rent to you or lease something to you. Also, very currently, unfortunately, a lot of employment opportunities or employers are actually looking at people's credit reports in order to determine whether you would be a good hire. In some cases, this mostly happens in cases if you work for a financial institution or you deal with some type of sensitive information. So when I say this, I mean like banks and sometimes government agencies will look at your credit score or credit history, and they can very well deny employment if they don't find that it meets their criteria. So when I say credit, not all credit is bad. And although you have this concept of debt, not all debt is bad. You have good debt and you have bad debt. What makes good debt bad debt is your ability to pay the debt back. Okay, so what do I mean by debt? So it's basically how this borrowed money is used, and basically what the potential is in terms of how you intend to pay this money back. So when I say good debt, I mean this is typically debt that would maybe have some type of investment opportunity in the future for you. Maybe it would appreciate in some type of value. So sometimes, so a lot of times when I say good debt, I'm talking about mortgages, because houses appreciate value in the future. They can be borrowed against. They can create generational wealth for a lot of families, especially if you're talking about real estate investment. Student loans, although everyone has them and they are horrible in a lot of cases, they can be considered good debt. Just because it increases your chance to earn more or may give you better job opportunities. That's what I mean by student loans being a good debt. Then business loans, as well as, so business loans, what I mean is if the debt for your business is managed well, it can actually grow and generate more income for yourself and for your business. Now, when I say credit card debt, these are things that are typically things purchased, but they typically are not essential to you. And these are items that unfortunately depreciate in value in the long term. Okay, so some examples may include credit card debt. Okay, high interest consumer loans. These are loans that you typically take out because you wanted to make a purchase and you had every intention of paying it back in a short amount of time. And that's the reason why they have these high interest rates on them. But these don't look very well on the credit report. And these are ones that you would ideally want to pay off very quickly. Car loans are necessary for a lot of people, especially if you need something more reliable, but they are considered a bad debt and they do count against you. And then payday loans. In most states, these payday loans are loans that you take. Basically, you need something until Friday and you're like, I really need some money until Friday. And so you take out, we call a payday loan. These are intended to be very short-term loans. That's why they are typically very, have been made illegal in most states, just because they're so high interest that it's almost impossible for a lot of people to pay these loans back. And the interest rates are typically something crazy, like you borrow $100 and now you owe $150 within 2 days. So that's the reason why they're typically not legal in all states. And there's something I would definitely recommend for most people to honestly stay away from. So lastly, we're going to look at some common financial mistakes that people make, especially for those just now dealing with the concept of budgeting. And some of the mistakes that I want to go over is not budgeting at all, just saying I'll figure it out, I'll pay for things, and things will work out for the best. That's just not ideal. Figure out what works for you, whether that be an app, whether that be if you have to write it down on paper, but have some type of form of budgeting. Living beyond your means is the biggest one, and that comes into play when people decide to get credit. Credit cards is a very easy way to get into debt and a very easy way to live beyond your means, because you typically forget, this is not my money. This is money I have to actually pay back in the future. And then neglecting an emergency fund, having no savings, having nothing set aside for an unexpected expense, and then you're going into debt because of something came up unexpectedly. Accumulating high interest debt, that means taking out credit cards and the interest rate is something horrible, like 30%. That means, once again, if your credit limit for a credit card is $100, if you pay this off every month, you would still be paying $130 to borrow that $100. So that's what I mean by high interest debt. Not saving for retirement. This is something, although for many, they don't have to worry about until much later in life. This is something you don't want to put off until later. You want to start now. Ignoring your insurance needs. When I say insurance needs, this is everything from life insurance to health insurance. Even at the ripe young age, things happen. So have these conversations. Life insurance is very important for everyone, and it doesn't always mean in the event of something happening. Life insurance can be borrowed against if something should happen and you have an unexpected expense. So it could very well be a life raft for you in an emergency situation. Impulse spending, meaning I want it, so I get it, and I don't think about it. Ignoring financial goals, meaning you said I want to save up for something, but not budgeting for it, not having a spending plan. Also, not seeking professional financial advice. A lot of times we tend to take the advice of family members or people who are not financial professionals, and a lot of times it gets us in trouble. Not everything everything doesn't work for everyone. Following trends blindly just because it's popular on social media, once again, it may not necessarily work for you. Not negotiating. What I mean by this is not everything, while everything has a price, not everything is set in stone. That even involves credit cards. If you have, you're getting your credit card and the interest rate is something like 30%, you can call up your credit card company and say, hey, this interest rate is horrible. Can we negotiate something lower? Everything is negotiable. Lack of financial education, and this just goes back to not being financially literate, meaning not knowing what your options are. What are some things you can look into in terms of like budgeting and planning for your spending? And the last thing I want to look at, and I typically do this at the beginning of the workshop, but I think it's just something I always want to kind of stick in people's mind, is the biggest issue we have nowadays is separating our needs from wants. And that's because a lot of times our wants seem like things we need, and it's not. That's really where you're going to succeed and fail in terms of budgeting, is not mixing up the two terms. And once again, wants are things that are not essential for survival. You can live without them. You want them, and it would give you joy. But however, these are things that if you needed to cut back on something, this is where you would look. And some examples, once again, are your entertainment, vacations, designer clothing, gadgets and electronics, luxury items, things that we don't necessarily need. And then needs are things you need for survival. And these are things you need to maintain some reasonable, we call it reasonable quality of life, meaning have a roof over your head, having somewhere that you have steady access to food and water, having the clothing that you need. It may not be name brand, but having those things, as well as having access to healthcare and having access to some form of education, whether that be in a formal setting or not. So that's what I mean when I say wants. Any questions? I know I any questions from you, I guess, Rose?
No, this was all great. Thank you. Give me 1 second.